everybody. Thanks for coming out on this nice holiday weekend. I just want to tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Dr. Christina Ziegler-McPherson has been a history advisor to the Hoboken Historical Museum since 2007. Some of the exhibits that she has curated for us include our exhibit on World War I, which we did in 2008, I think, and our immigration exhibit, which we did in 2013. 14. She also has helped us with research on many other exhibits that we've done here. She received her PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she is now in England. She just finished research, just finished her new book, which is going to be published early 2017. The book is about immigration promotion to the U.S. in the 19th century. It's called Selling America, Settling the American Continent, 1607 to 1914. She's going to tell us today about a little bit about some of her research into Hoboken during World War I. And she came all the way from England, folks, to be with us today. Dr. Christina Ziegler-McPherson.
Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate especially you coming on a holiday weekend. I had made plans to visit family in the New York City area, and the museum was kind enough to let me, in effect, weasel this in also. And the time is also very convenient because I have an 8 o'clock flight to Iceland tonight on my way home to London. So what I would like to do is share with you some of the research that I've been doing over the last couple of years in Germany, looking at the German steamship companies and their crews and their experiences during World War I. And I have to have a little codicil that I do have some images, but I don't have a lot of images because a lot of German archives don't let you take photographs of documents. So what I have is, of course, lots of notes, which are not very visually interesting. But I do have a few things that I'd like to share with you. So, as you know, immigration and trade were the lifeblood of Hoboken's economy in the early 1900s. As part of the Port of New York, Hoboken was a place in which millions of dollars of goods, most of it manufactured here in town, were shipped to Europe and the rest of the world, and hundreds of thousands of people, mostly European immigrants, passed through the city supporting dozens of travel-related businesses. Large immigrant communities with close ties to Europe developed in the 19th century, which enriched the city greatly culturally but also economically. But these connections were threatened by the war beginning in August of 1914. So this is one of these images. One of the things I've been looking at are the business connections between northern Germany, mostly Bremen and Hamburg, and New York City. One of the ways I do this is I've been looking at a series of basically celebratory biographies of wealthy businessmen, and I ignore the celebration part, but these little biographies talk about all of their business relationships, all the different companies that they're connected to and invested in and own, etc. So next slide, please. And so these are a series of these documents, these collections of businessmen in Bremen and Hamburg. And this is one that I've been using a lot. It's a collection of millionaires in the Hanseatic cities. Andrew Carnegie supposedly said there were only three millionaires in all of Germany, and this German was very offended by this, and so he then wrote this booklet in which he lists all of the millionaires in the Hanseatic cities alone, and there's like more than 100 of them, and he lists their wealth and their business, so that's very useful to someone like me. So to give you a portrait of Hoboken in the summer of 1914. So in 1914, Hoboken was a densely packed city with an economy based on shipping, transportation, and light manufacturing. It was also one of the most German cities in the U.S., with 10,000 of its 70,000 residents having been born in Germany. That's about 14%. And another 8,000 Hobokenites had German-born parents. So 26% of the town was either German or German-American. Hoboken also had 1,700 Austrian and Austrian-American residents. Its school system was bilingual in German from kindergarten, which had been pioneered in Hoboken by German immigrants, to high school. And community life revolved around the many German churches and social clubs. German-owned immigrant-owned businesses such as Käufel and Esser employed thousands of people. Hoboken was also the American home port of 5 steamship and shipping companies, including Hamburg America Steamship Company and North German Lloyd Steamship Company, which had been bringing immigrants and other travelers to Hoboken since the 1860s. Nearly every day of the week, a ship belonging to one of the German lines, the Dutch, or the Scandinavian steamship companies arrived or departed from the Hoboken piers, just as the British, French, and other European lines sailed from their piers on the Manhattan side of the Hudson River. And to give you a sense of the traffic, in 1913, Hapag, which is the abbreviation for Hamburg America, had 190 steamships, and these ships made 1,109 round trips and transported 463,571 passengers. North German Lloyd had 116 steamships and transported 662,385 people in 1913. So these 2 companies alone transported 1 million people. Now, that's not just immigrants coming to the United States, it's people sailing to Australia, Asia, et cetera, but this is a massive volume of transport. Hamburg America and North German Lloyd sailed twice a week from Hoboken to Europe, and Holland America and Scandinavia America lines made weekly sailings. In 1910, about 10% of Hoboken residents worked directly in the shipping industry as sailors, 2,000 men, longshoremen, 5,000 men, while another 16,500 men worked as teamsters and luggage porters, and several hundred others worked in industries dependent on shipping and passenger transportation, such as steamship ticket agents, hotel owners, restaurant and saloon owners, and runners and guides. The city derived 1/5 of its annual revenue from taxes on the piers and liquor licenses for Hoboken's 338 saloons. 60 bars were along River Street between 1st and 4th Street. 59 of them were German-owned. Now, this has been the main focus of my research recently. And so a subset of Hoboken's German community, in it but not of it, were the crew members of the German steamship companies that regularly sailed to and from the port of New York. These men were comparable to the modern airline crew. They are frequently in the same cities every few weeks, frequenting waterfront bars and restaurants, and developing long-distance relationships with people in New York and New Jersey. The large luxury liners typically traveled with crews of 500 to 600, but smaller vessels made do with crews of anywhere from 50 to 200, depending on the size of the ship and the class of passenger. The North German Lloyd steamship, the Kronprinz Wilhelm, for instance, had a crew of about 525, while the largest ship afloat at the time, the Hapag Vaterland, had a crew of more than 1,200. The occupation on board these ships varied considerably. The Vaterland's crew, for instance, had the Commodore, Hans Russer, 4 captains, 7 officers, a chief engineer, 3 first engineers, 35 assistants and electricians. Boilers were operated by 12 firemen, 15 oilers, 187 stokers, which is a coal shoveler, and 189 trimmers, which is the men who distribute the coal to the stokers. The ship had 8 kitchens, with 3 chefs, 52 cooks, 5 pastry bakers, and 36 waiters. The other hotel aspect of the ship, accommodation, was served by 350 stewards. In addition, the ship had 3 doctors, 3 doctors' assistants, and 1 nurse, 3 telephone operators, a stenographer, and a typewriter, which is what we would call a typist now, a master of the bath, several masseurs, a bookseller, a cabinet maker, a gardener, and a social director. And the ship had a full orchestra. Very important on German ships. You always had to have a band. The big ships always had a good orchestra. Now, what we know of the German crew members comes from the U.S. National Archives. And these are records of 1,131 crew members who were interned by the U.S. in April 1917. Of these men, we know that 109 were from Hamburg, 20 were from the Hamburg suburb of Altona, 6 came from the port city of Cuxhaven, which is at the mouth of the Elbe, 33 came from Bremen, 101 from Bremerhaven, which is the city's port, 126 from Ley an der Weser, which is a village that is now a neighborhood in North Bremerhaven, 23 from the village of Geestemünde, which is also now part of Bremerhaven, and 11 were from Kiel, which is on the North Sea. So 38% were either from Bremen, Hamburg, or Kiel. 611 were from other cities, mainly in northern Germany, but from all over the country. And a few were Austrian and Hungarian. So if you show the next slide. So this is something that makes, historians get super excited. When I saw this in the National Archive, I called my husband and said, yes, eureka, I have found it. I wanted to see if there was a record of the Germans who had been interned, and lo and behold, in the archive, there is this very large document. It's 27 pages that lists all these men. It lists their ship, their position on the ship, where they were interned, and most importantly for my research, their nearest friend or family, and so it tells me where they lived in Germany, who their connections are in the US. So, out of this...
When you said they were interned, of course the US entered in 17.
Yep.
But I would think that German shipping after 14, after the war was declared, just basically went down a nil because of the British blockade.
I will be explaining this.
So my question was, when were they interned? 14?
These men were all interned in April of 1917. Yeah. So of these 1,100 crew members, 430, or about 40%, had family or friends in the U.S., and 94 had immediate family, meaning wives and children, in either Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, or in Hoboken and Jersey City. Most of these wives and children were brought to the U.S. in late 1916. Another 265 crew members had friends and other relatives, such as aunts, uncles, cousins, in-laws, in the New York City, Hudson County area. 87 crew members had relatives or friends in other parts of the U.S., the most popular areas being Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Chicago, St. Louis, and Milwaukee. The last 3 were cities that had large German communities. So for instance, Karl Johannes Stopfeld, who was a barber on the König Wilhelm II, was from Hamburg, but his fiancée, Rita Richter, lived with a Mrs. Lehman at 155 East 92nd Street in Manhattan. North German Lloyd bookseller Julius Heinrich Landre's oldest child, Anna, was born in New York in 1913, but his second child, Johann, was born in January 1914 in Bremen. When Landre was imprisoned in 1917, he reported that his wife and children were living in Bremen. Now, many of these crew members had bank accounts in either New York or Hoboken. Many chose to park their savings with John Stenick, an immigrant banker and ticket seller here. Other crew members, such as Kaiser Wilhelm II first-class cabin steward Fritz Hammermann, left their money at the Hoboken Bank for savings. Augustus Wilhelm Karl Schwever, a seaman on the Prinz Joachim, told immigration authorities that he had $397 deposited with the First National Bank of Hoboken and another $1,000 held at the German Seamen's Home in Hoboken. August Hermann Wixwack, a seaman on the Prinz Joachim, had an account with $50 at the German Savings Bank. Emil Duva, who was a fireman or a coal shoveler on the Pennsylvania, also had an account at the German Savings Bank with $150. Other seamen left money with friends or girlfriends. Henry Kukulinski, a bosun on the George Washington, left $190 with a friend named Engelbert in Union Hill for safekeeping. And Alex Kuhler, a barber on the Großer Kurfürst, reported having $300 with a friend named Fred Hoppe, who lived at 108 First Street in Hoboken. So on Friday, July 31st, 1914, the Hoboken piers were their usual frantic scene of activity. The North German Lloyd ship steamship, the Princess Irene, and the Hamburg America's newish luxury liner, the Vaterland, were scheduled to sail the following day at 11 and noon respectively, and hundreds of crewmen and dock workers were working to get these massive ships ready for departure for Southampton, Cherbourg, Hamburg, Bremen, and Genoa. Hundreds of tons of coal, food, and beverages, as well as mail and other freight needed to be loaded on board the ships for their 7-day transatlantic voyages. Among the 2,700 passengers booked on the Vaterland were the Duchess of Marlborough, William A. Rockefeller, and Mrs. William G. Rockefeller. These and many other wealthy Americans were going to Europe for vacation and business. Another 750 third class and 800 fourth class immigrant passengers were also returning to Europe on the Vaterland, and the Princess Irene had room for 1,954 steerage passengers. Men were going about their business on the docks and in the offices of the steamship companies when an announcement came suddenly from Hamburg America Vice Director William G. Sickle from his office at 45 Broadway. Quote, "In view of the uncertainty of the present European situation, we have decided to postpone the sailing of the Vaterland tomorrow, and the America from Boston August 1st, and the Imperator for Hamburg July 31st. Due notice will be given of the eventual sailing dates." Nordstrom and Lloyd made a similar announcement about the sailing of the Princess Irene, destined for Genoa, and the Crown Prince Wilhelm, scheduled to sail from Hoboken to Bremen on Tuesday, August 3rd. Then steamship executives made another announcement, even more shocking. Several steamships already at sea, the Habach ship President Grant, and the Nordstrom and Lloyd ship the Grosser Kurfürst, already more than 400 miles at sea after sailing on Thursday, July 30th, have been wired instructions to return to New York. Within 24 hours, more wireless communications were transmitted to German steamships at sea on the Atlantic and in the Caribbean. Germany had declared war on Russia, seek neutral harbors, and watch out for French warships. By the end of the first week of August, Germany had declared war on France and invaded Luxembourg and Belgium, and Great Britain had declared war on Germany. By August 7th, the beginning of the Great Battle of the Frontiers, nearly 20 German steamships crowded the piers of Hoboken, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, and shipping managers were saying that no German ship would sail until the war in Europe had ended. Great Britain's blockade of Germany prevented ships from entering or leaving the North Sea and made it impossible for German ships to return to Germany for the duration of the war. By the end of the first week of August, the piers of the Port of New York were crowded with mostly German steamships. 4 German oil tankers were also in dock in Tompkinsville. Ultimately, 27 German flagships in New York would be seized in New York in 1917, 39 total in ports around the country. Now, with the great liners no longer sailing, Hoboken felt the effects of the European war immediately. Waterfront jobs disappeared as immigrant traffic dried up, and restaurants, hotels, and boarding houses began to suffer from the loss of business. It would be 3 years before war contracts started flowing to Hoboken factories. I'd like to read a New York Times article from August 21st, 1914, that I think really captures the scene in Hoboken at the beginning of the war. And so the headline is, "Hoboken hit hard by Europe's war." These are dull days along River Street in Hoboken. Ordinarily, the rush season of the year would just be beginning, with the tourists swarming homeward. But since the war has suspended the sailing of German liners, the waterfront in Hoboken resembles a deserted village. Business is almost at a standstill. The rattling of a wagon full of bricks or a dray load of beer over the cobblestones rarely disturbs the quiet of the neighborhood. And here and there, around the corner, lampposts, workmen lounge and wonder when it will be over. 6 big Nordstrom and Lloyd ships are tied up in Hoboken: the Kaiser Wilhelm II, Grosser Kurfürst, Princess Irene, Friedrich der Grosse, Barbarossa, and George Washington. In the Hamburg American piers to the south of them are the Vaterland, President Lincoln, Pennsylvania, Bohemia, and König Wilhelm II. The enclosures in front of the piers are empty, save for 1 or 2 gatekeepers and customs officials, and on most of the piers there is very little activity. The employees of the Nordstrom and Lloyd declare that everything is going on as usual, that they are keeping everybody busy, and that there is no need to worry about conditions at present. But the refutation of that statement is obvious to anyone. Since the war began, no one has been allowed on the vessels or the piers except employees of the lines and customs officials. There are perhaps a dozen of these men on duty, but they have little to do. The Burns detectives who guarded the Vaterland in the first days of the war have been withdrawn, and the ships are guarded by the employees of the steamship companies. The policemen along the waterfront work 13 hours a day now instead of 8. The crews of the 11 liners that are tied up at the wharves, several thousand men all told, are kept on board the vessels. They get shore leave every other night, but it is said that since the war started, they have received only $1 a week in addition to their food and lodging. So they are not heavy spenders on their night of shore, and it is no wonder that the proprietors of the cafes along the waterfront, no less than the merchants of other wares, complain that business is all but dead. So far as can be conjectured by landsmen, there is nothing for the crews to do but keep the ships clean and wait for the war to end. The donkey engines, which run the dynamos and the pumps, and pump the water necessary for the ship's use, are kept going, but otherwise there is apparently little to keep the sailors busy. Some of them, not a great many, have obtained work on other liners or about Hoboken, and it is said that the lines have not dismissed anyone except those whom they knew are sure of other work. The pier laborers who unload cargoes are for the most part employed only by the job, and hence the companies are not responsible for the fact that 3,000 or 4,000 of them have had nothing to do for the past 2 weeks. Foremen employed on the piers, who it is said, often made from $35 to $40 a week, were employed when the war started as special policemen to guard the piers and the steamers. According to a report, they are getting only $16 a week now, but that is better fortune than has fallen to the lot of most of the waterfront laborers of Hoboken. To be sure, the Holland America and Scandinavia lines are still running, but the volume of their business is nothing like as great as that of the 2 great German lines. On the Hamburg America piers, there has been a certain amount of activity since the freighter Bohemia arrived last Saturday with a cargo of crockery and Christmas toys, but the unloading of the Bohemia cannot last forever, and it employs a comparably small number of men. Persons who know the situation say most of the longshoremen are only casual laborers with, as a rule, no families and no homes. Many of them have left town for Philadelphia, Baltimore, and other places where they think they have a better chance. Those of them who have families in Hoboken are in a bad way, for it has been said that 3/4 of the population of the town is dependent on the shipping business in one way or another. And in consequence, the whole city is feeling the effects of the war more deeply than perhaps any other town in the country. Butchers find that there is a good deal less meat eaten in the waterfront districts than there was last month. And if the pessimistic remarks of restaurant keepers may be credited, nobody is eating much of anything. The piers, which are swarming usually with drays and wagons and passengers, are now empty save for the scattered watchmen. And along River Street, where the traffic in the summer is ordinarily crowded and incessant, the storekeepers lounge in their doorways and read the war news. The only persons who are really busy are the newsboys, scurrying about with the latest war news for the German press. And the population of Hoboken, too one-sided to get up much of an argument, read the dispatches from Belgium and wonder when the town is going to get a chance to work again. So the steamship companies had 2 major problems in August of 1914. The first was an enormous cash flow problem, as Hapag and North German Lloyd had to refund thousands of tickets for August and fall sailings, and they were not able to get credit from American banks or infusions of cash from Germany. The second major problem was what to do with the approximately 8,000 idle crewmen now stranded in New York and other American ports. Under American and international maritime law, sailors and other crew members in port were allowed to leave ship, a shore leave, but were not deemed immigrants because they were expected to return to their ships after shore leave and then leave the country. In Germany, ship crew members were expected to register with local shipping authorities every time they changed ship, and by the era of the steamship, it was common for sailors to sail onto a vessel's crew for months at a time, depending on the ship and the company's sailing schedule. After a crew member's contract was up, he was discharged, usually in the company's home port. German consuls could discharge sailors in foreign ports, but they were bound by that country's immigration laws. As soon as the war was declared, more than 1,500 German sailors deserted their ships, many of them getting passage on eastbound ships to return to Germany to fight. Many German crew members were military reservists, most in the German Navy, and so were anxious to return to Germany to do their military service. Others just simply disappeared, in effect becoming illegal immigrants because they had not been formally admitted to the U.S. The steamship companies were reluctant to let their people go because of the expectation and then hope that the war would end quickly and that transatlantic sailing could resume. The steamship companies did not want to have to rehire several thousand skilled sailors and other valuable crew members. Furthermore, the companies felt obligated to their employees. Many had sailed with the lines for 10 years or more, and so there was a desire to not lose valuable crew members. And finally, U.S. immigration law against the entry of people liable to become a public charge meant that unemployed crew members could not be discharged unless they had savings and another way of supporting themselves without violating U.S. laws against contract labor. So it's a very complicated immigration situation. By early September 1914, the German steamship companies were faced with having to cut wages for thousands of crew members who could no longer work, but who could also no longer get new jobs on other ships or leave the U.S. Crews were first put on shore leave or shore pay, a reduced wage for when they weren't actually working or being discharged from the crew. Men with wives or children or who could show they were supporting parents received family subsidies. They could get pay cuts between 5 to 60% or be discharged. So men could receive some kind of subsidy, but they generally faced salary cuts of up to 2/3 for single men and 1/3 for married men or those who had dependents. Low-paid crew members making $15 or less per week did not have their wages cut. The companies were obligated to return the men to Germany as per their contracts, but could not because of the decision not to sail and the now militarized Atlantic. Faced with reduced pay and few chances to work for another neutral steamship company, many German crew members began looking for jobs on shore. Those already working in service jobs, such as stewards, waiters, barbers, etc., had better chances of finding onshore work than engineers, boats, and other navigational crew members. Family connections and other relationships in the New York City area became key to crew members' ability to find offshore work and stretch their meager pay envelopes. Now, a few very lucky people were able to find good jobs on shore. Friedrich Bertram, who was a wireless operator and electrician on the Princess Irene, was hired by the Atlantic Communication Company in Manhattan, but in late May 1916. Bertram lived alternately on ship and on shore and worked for the Atlantic, but had to present himself at Ellis Island to be allowed to take his trunk off the ship in February 1917. Other crew on the service side of ships found jobs as waiters, barbers, and manual laborers in New York City and Hoboken. Herman Peters, a steward on the Vaterland, had worked occasionally as a waiter in New York City for 20 years when he finally decided to formally enter the U.S. in February 1917 so he could work at the Turnverein, the gymnastics club, on Lexington Avenue at 86th Street. Joseph Schroeder came to the U.S. first in 1898 and lived with his brother, who owned a saloon at 166th Street and Franklin Avenue in the Bronx. In September 1916, he somehow got a job as a steward on the Princess Irene through a Hoboken employment agency. He left the ship in February 1917 with the intention of getting a job at Mills Hotel at 37th and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. And then Alex Cooler, the barber on the Grosser Kurfürst, supplemented his income by working as a barber in Hoboken and Secaucus, 1916-17. William Lausch, a 22-year-old oiler on the Hapag ship Hagen, bounced around from job to job, working as a porter on Staten Island, a fireman in an apartment building on the Upper West Side, a machinist, and then an unknown position for the United Dressed Beef Company. But about 1,600 men were stuck on board ship with little to do. Crew members complained about the pay cuts and discharges, but failed to successfully organize to pressure the companies to change policy. Ship captains, especially of large ships such as the Vaterland and the Pennsylvania, struggled to find things for their crew members to do to prevent discontent and labor organization. Vaterland commander Hans Russer called the Hoboken police to the ship in early November 1914 out of fear that the crew might mutiny over the pay cuts, and then again in late May 1915 out of concern that depressed crew members might attempt to sabotage the ship. Company managers worried that the seemingly never-ending limbo of being stuck in port was making some crew members severely depressed or suicidal. By the fall of 1916, it was clear to everyone that the war was not going to end soon. And so many German crew members began sending for their families in Germany. using the neutral Holland-America line sailing from Rotterdam. First cook on the North German Line steamer George Washington, Ernst Warm, brought his wife Anna over on the Holland-America ship Noordam in September 1916 and rented her a furnished apartment at 522 Bloomfield Street. Third engineer on the George Washington, Adolf Schriever, brought his wife Elizabeth and 2 boys, aged 6 and 4, on the Noordam in early February 1917. Schriever and his wife had been married in 1908 in Hoboken, but the couple had returned to Germany in 1910, and their children were born in Bremen and Leh, which is now a neighborhood in Bremerhaven, but was a separate village then. After 2.5 years apart, Schriever sent for his wife and family and rented an apartment for them at 511 Washington Street, but said he intended to move his family to Texas, where he had a brother. Musician and steward Emil Castle brought his wife Ludmilla and 18-month-old son over on the Noordam in early November 1914 and found an apartment for them at 300 West 56th Street in Manhattan. He mainly lived on board ship, but left to visit his family and play concerts in the city for extra money. Castler had already taken out his first citizenship papers, but could not complete the naturalization process in time before the war started, and when the U.S. entered the war, rather. Carl White, who was a steward on the Grosser Kurfürst, was another crew member who moved back and forth between New York and Bremen. White had lived in New York City between 1902 and 1904, returned to Germany, continued to sail with North Norman Lloyd. He married his wife Charlotte in 1909 at the German Lutheran Church in Hoboken, but the couple returned to Germany and lived in the village of Geestemünde until the start of the war. Charlotte White came back to New York on the Noordam in October 1915, and the couple lived at 230 West 135th Street in Manhattan. Second steward Bernard Brans worked on the Grosser Kurfürst and brought his wife Elise and 6-year-old child on the New Amsterdam in November 1916 and rented an apartment at 104 7th Street in Hoboken. Mrs. Brans also had a brother who lived in New York City on Amsterdam Avenue. Although nearly all of the German crew members were German citizens, a few were American citizens of German heritage who found working for the German shipping companies a good business. Joseph Forkenen was born in New York City to German immigrant parents. When he was 3 years old, in 1872, his parents moved back to Germany, and he grew up in Bremen, married, and raised his 2 sons there. A steward for the North German Lloyd for 28 years, Forkenen sailed to New York City every 3 weeks and came to have a home in Jersey City. One of his sons lived in Bremen, while the other lived in the U.S. His adult son in Bremen was registered with city authorities as a U.S. citizen, possibly to keep him from being drafted into the German army. So on February 1st, 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in the hopes of starving Great Britain out of the war before the U.S. could mobilize a force in France. In response, the U.S. broke off diplomatic relations with Germany. On February 7th, 1917, U.S. immigration officials at Ellis Island interviewed 77 German crew members seeking to enter the U.S. as immigrants. This was in response to new rules that prevented crew members living on board ship from leaving the ship now that relations between Germany and the U.S. had been broken. Of the 77, 57 were admitted with or without an interview. 4 were found to be liable to be a public charge and ordered deported. 15 were found to have entered the country illegally, and so warrants for arrest and then deportation were to be issued. 2 were shown to be U.S. citizens, 1 by birth and 1 by naturalization. Oh, could you turn it one more time? So this is a transcript of an interview of a man, a crew member named Theodore Hengefoss. And if you can go one more. So this is then a transcript of what he tells the immigration authorities and the questions that they ask. And so for historians, this kind of information is very valuable because it enables us to try to track these people's movements in a very interesting, fluid period of time. So after a very tense 2 months, the U.S. declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917. The first thing the U.S. did after declaring war was to seize the German-owned ships and piers. On the early morning of April 6, in a heavy rain, 300 300 customs officers and soldiers from the 22nd U.S. Infantry from Staten Island seized these 27 ships docked in New York, including Hoboken. The German crew members were taken to Ellis Island for internment. They would spend the remainder of the war either at Ellis Island or at a prison camp in Hot Springs, North Carolina. So this is a photo of Germans going to be removed. Here's the next photo. And this is a list of Hapag crew members who died during the war, all over. And so it's a memorial in the company's annual report from 1921. And this is a photo of a monument in Bremerhaven of 106 men who died in U.S. internment in the war. And I was actually just in Bremerhaven a few weeks ago doing some work for the Maritime Museum, and I stumbled across this memorial. And so I was able to take down all these names and compare them to my records, and so the nerdiness continues. I'm sorry?
What did they die from?
Various diseases. Some of these fellows were old and had heart problems, diabetes, these kind of things, but a variety of health problems. And then after the war, some German sailors did come back to America, either as immigrants or simply as visitors to rekindle old relationships. And so this is a story from the New York Times from 1922 when the Vaterland's former captain, Hans Russer, came back. And so he came back to meet with friends, and he was seen as a source of valuable information about conditions in Germany at the time. And so he, I guess, gave a little talk, and the New York Times reported on that. And so there was some back and forth still did continue after the war, but the war obviously was a very important breaking point. So thank you very, very much for your attention.